What's happening with the Jordan Neely case first? Daniel Penny is the defendant. Jordan Neely is the man who died. It appears the jury's hung on the most serious charge, which is whether he recklessly caused the death of Jordan Neely. The second charge is whether he was criminally negligent in causing Jordan Neely's death. Or they could, of course, acquit him entirely of these charges because he was clearly a good Samaritan trying to protect the passengers on that subway car where this altercation took place. Just a quick refresher for those who don't remember. Jordan Neely came onto the subway train. He was acting irrationally. He was saying he didn't care if he died or went to prison. He was threatening passengers. Passengers were scared. And Daniel Penny got up and got him in a headlock and subdued him and the crazy behavior. And ultimately, Jordan Neely died because, well, he didn't have enough oxygen, but he also had some other health problems that were introduced at trial as potentially contributing or indeed possibly the cause.
What else does that remind you of? It reminds you of a guy who had a counterfeit 20 in Minnesota that tragically lost his life, but we don't know how he actually passed away. Nobody knows. There's conflicting reports. Same here with Megyn Kelly talking about Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely on the Megyn Kelly show, breaking it down. She does a good job on this. She reminds me of a more calm version of, and that's not a diss or anything to either one, but a more kind of a more slower, calm version of Candace Owens. And when she does these types of reports, both some of the best in the business. This after show carnage is going to be Megyn Kelly breaking down the Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely stuff on her own Megyn Kelly show. Let's get into it a little bit more here.
Cause. So I think a lot of us believed that this jury was going to come back like that with an acquittal. No, we're now on, I think, day 4 of deliberations. And just before we came to air, the jury had sent a note into the judge saying, we can't agree on the first charge, the most serious charge. Now, that doesn't necessarily tell us whether they're in agreement on the criminally negligent homicide charge. I don't know how the jury instructions read. You know, normally they'll say, did he recklessly cause the death of this person? If yes, you know, move on to number 2. I don't know what the direction was. Like, did they have to start with number 1? Could they have started with number 2? Whatever. I assume number 2 should be easier for them because they're only saying they're deadlocked on number 1. And so they went into court and said to the judge, we're deadlocked. And the judge asked the lawyers, what should the instruction be, which is normal. And the defense said, it's a mistrial, which was a nice try, but yeah, probably not.
By the time this records, we do know that Daniel Penny was acquitted. He was acquitted on the criminal negligent homicide case involving Jordan Neely. It was a very divisive reaction that we saw afterwards. We even saw protests. They brought him back. BLM came back, at least for the time being, at least for one day. Today, I'm recording this, he was acquitted. And for some reason, we're divided on this based on the right and the left. Megyn Kelly, I think she does a good job of being more in the middle, of more, not that the middle's a good place to be, but more fair-minded. And let's get back to her. She's obviously on Daniel Penny's side, but listening to both sides.
And the prosecution said, tell him to go back in and continue deliberating. And it looks like that's what the judge has done. There's been like update after update when we've been on the air. Let me just give you the latest. Okay. The judge said he thinks the jury could move on to consider count 2, criminally negligent homicide, even if they're deadlocked on count 1. He asks the DA's brain trust to work on it. The reporting here is still in the courtroom wondering how fast the jury will come back. This is from Matthew Russell at Inner City Publication. The judge, we got the next note. So the jury, he sent them back in to continue deliberating. Then they sent out a note almost immediately thereafter saying, we, the jury, request further clarification on whether a person reasonably believes force is necessary. We would like more on what is a reasonable person. They're obviously divided. The judge responded, there's a passage in People versus Gates or Goats, and then he chuckles because he realizes people, I don't know why he chuckled, in which they note that reasonableness.
Well, he chuckled because, well, I don't know exactly why he chuckled, but what the judge set up that Megyn Kelly's talking about here with Daniel Penny on trial is they wanted, in my opinion, a conviction on something. So they said, hey, you can convict just on the lower charge, hoping that the jury would convict on just the lower charge. The judge could do whatever the judge does at sentencing, but luckily that did not happen. Daniel Penny is out. They were actually calling him Daniel Perry online on some of the threads. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets in anger, demanding justice for Jordan Neely.
No justice! No peace! Fuck these racist ass police! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
Here we go. This is after the verdict. We have a lot of, looks like relatively young people. It looks like a total, it doesn't look like many. I mean, it could be about 100 is what I'm seeing here. So this isn't exactly George Floyd, but there's 100 people or so, just by my eyeballing it here, who wanted to make their opinions heard. Why haven't they? They're the ones that supported Black Lives Matter. Why haven't they figured out what happened to the money the last time? They ran off and they were doing parties in mansions and they were hiring consultants, and there's no money that went to any community that I saw, not substantial. They went to pricey mansions. I don't know where the money went. They never reconciled that. If they really cared about justice, they would look at that. Here's the speaking. This is like their Super Bowl. This is where they make their money. Let's get back to Megyn Kelly.
Says bring them back out. The jury's entering. The judge says to the jury, reasonableness is up to you to decide. What would a reasonable person do in this situation? He must have honestly believed that Jordan Neely was going to use physical force against him or someone else. And now the jury's getting lunch and we'll come back. I'd be very worried if I were the defense right now.
So I am obsessed with this case. I have been following it extremely closely. I get the trial transcripts.
I had a different feeling on it than Megyn Kelly. If they're arguing over it, that's good for the defense. They don't have an agreement on it, so they're arguing. At this point, they're arguing back and forth over both of the charges, basically, based on their questions. It's reasonable to assume at this point, and we know now that he got fully acquitted. If I'm the defense, I feel good about that.
Every day, I am pulling for Daniel Penny so hard. Now, what is salient here is that Jordan Neely was out of his mind on K2, a powerful synthetic drug that they can't even quantify how much was in his bloodstream. The ME testified that she was pressured to classify this death a homicide basically before she had finished the autopsy.
This is just like George Floyd.
Exactly.
And again, like anyone who hasn't seen The Fall of Minneapolis,
Do it.
avail yourself, because it is it puts in perspective just how much the media lies to us. My sister-in-law is the court reporter on this case, and she is convinced that part of the problem the jury is having coming to a verdict is because there are protesters outside that courthouse every day screaming that Daniel Penny is a racist, that this was a lynching. Daniel Penny took him down. He definitively, the defense did an expert job at this, medically did not cause him to die of a chokehold. That is not what killed Jordan Neely. It was the drugs. It was the state he was worked up in. And it was a sickling disease that he had.
If you didn't follow the trial, let me tell you, after Daniel Penny was holding him down and let him go, he was still alive and still breathing. The paramedics, the first responders that were on the scene made the call, which I don't blame them, that he was not in a good enough shape where they thought it would be safe to administer CPR. So that he was alive. There was some startling stuff that came out in the trial.
Had all three of these things combined to cause his death. He tried to get up at 3 minutes and 19 seconds into this chokehold. He moved with such force. Penny's underneath Neely on the subway floor. He exerted himself with so much force that he lifted Penny, a 6'1" former Marine, off of the floor. A personal anecdote about this. My brother is an interesting guy. He works in sanitation in New York. And his job is such that he has to deal with the CEOs of like multi-billion-dollar companies like MLB, top hospitals, you name it. And he also has to deal with his workforce, which is composed primarily of ex-felons. He will routinely say, the jobs I offer are the only ones in America where you can earn 6 figures and be illiterate. A guy comes into his office and says, your driver out there is in the parking lot going crazy out of his mind on PCP. 26-year-old kid, not super strong, not super tall. Cops come. It took 12 cops to get this guy down to the ground. 12 and half an hour. And my brother Bill said, this is the thing. When you take down a guy like that, fueled by that kind of drug that gives you superhuman power, you cannot let them back up. They will kill you. They will kill you. And this is stuff that I think the average person sitting at home has no knowledge of. I read the testimony of the passengers on that train, a host of races, ethnicities, socioeconomic status, teenage girl, a senior brand manager at Nike, all daily subway riders said they were sure they were going to die that day.
One of the things that actually distinguishes whatever you want to call the right from the left is the right, like you see here with Maureen Callahan, the right, Megyn Kelly, Maureen Callahan, those others on the right, they do research. They come with facts. They come with details. On the left, you have emotions. He shouldn't have been unlived. He was a Michael Jackson impersonator. What do we do with our homeless? All of these things are just abstract, emotional terms. She comes with, well, what did the people on the train say? Of all different colors and shapes and forms. Oh, here's a black woman who said that she was grateful and thanked Daniel Penny for stepping up and intervening because she was scared out of her mind. Quote, she thought that he was, Jordan Neely, satanic. But on the left, the firsthand encounter of that black woman doesn't matter. It's emotion to the ideology. That's the divide we are seeing here.
That Jordan Neely was that terrifying. So I think this is an easy acquittal, but this is a case that is fueled not by justice. It's Alvin Bragg. It's been racialized. If this were black on black, white on white, Daniel Penny wouldn't be here.
Wouldn't happen. This prosecutor's got a history of it, of giving preferential treatment to so-called marginalized criminals. Here she is bragging about it in SOT 6.
I had a murder case where the defendant did not intentionally kill the victim. He went into an ATM on the Upper West Side and tried to rob an individual. Unfortunately, it was an older individual. He was 86. And in the course of the robbery, he fell to the ground, and as a result, he died. This is, under the law, a felony murder, which is akin to intentional murder. However, when I first got the case, I learned, I took the time to learn about the defendant. And it was a strong case, so it wasn't about a whodunit. I knew immediately who did it. I could prove it. I could take it to trial that day and win it. But it wasn't about that. It was that the more I learned about the defendant and his life and the circumstances, the kinds of things that Jarrell was talking about, that one should take into account the trauma of that individual, I really felt incredibly sorry for him that he had gotten to that point in his life where he felt like there was no other choice but to commit this robbery.
Felt super sympathetic towards
What's
this guy.
missing in that account? The victim was an 87-year-old Asian man, a beloved college professor, survivor of the Korean War. The perp, the guy who killed him, that passive language kills me. He fell as a result of the fall. He died. He was murdered for $300 he took out of an ATM by a middle-aged black man. She had the gall to go to the victim's family and say, are you interested in a little premise called restorative justice?
Oh my God.
Restorative justice. So this guy gets, I think he got maybe 10 years. He probably would have gotten life. So she's perfectly willing to extend that kind of sympathy and do that kind of background check.
Let me tell you a couple things here about this. We'll end on this. I found it an interesting note that Jordan Neely's father, and I'm like, what happened to his family? He had a really rough, as you could imagine, upbringing. His mother died early, I believe. And his father wasn't in the picture. And then all of a sudden, his father comes back in the picture, Andre Zachary. How? He filed a lawsuit against Daniel Penny, the father who was never there, the father who was in part, allegedly, part of the reason why Jordan Neely became Jordan Neely, why Jordan Neely got Daniel Pennied, was because of his father, Andre Zachary. And he's trying to make money with a lawsuit to extract a payday from Daniel Penny instead of talking about the homelessness, instead of talking about the importance of being a father in the lives of your child, instead of talking about the importance of mental health failures and issues. Andre Zachary is seizing the media frenzy just to squeeze like a lemon, like you're trying to make lemonade, every last drop out of the body of Jordan Neely. All these activists, that's all they do. Extract everything they can off the last little bits of the remnants of these, mostly it's always black men that they're doing that to. How do we recover from this? I have no idea. You let me know. After show carnage, it never stops.
The next clip is ready below. Welcome to After Show Carnage.